Fallen Angels, Disc 3.
Pee-wee asked me to write a letter to his girl for him. I had been right about her writing him a Dear John letter, and it really messed him up. "Every time I get ready to write the damn thing, I get messed around," Pee-wee said. "Pee-wee, I can't write a letter to your girl for you," I said. "Hey, if somebody in Chicago is doing my night work for me, you can write a letter," Pee-wee said. We had some gung-ho stationery, the kind with a picture of GIs jumping out of a chopper on it. The picture was in light blue and you could write over it. "What do you want me to say?" "Say, Dear two-timing slut." "What's her name?" "Her name Earlene." "Okay, so I'm writing, Dear Earlene. How can you leave me for that old fat Eddie Thompson when his feet stink, he ain't got no hair, and he got breath that smells like a polar bear what done died from eating too much garlic? You got all that?" Wait a minute. I wrote it all down, then told him to go ahead. "I know you need help with you and little mommy being on relief and everything, but I told you I would take care of you as soon as I got back into the world." "Who's little mommy?" "That's her daughter. She's real cute," Pee-wee said. "Earlene was married before, but her husband drove a cab and got killed in a holdup. I know it's hard to wait for anybody, but I will try to be worth waiting for, so give it a try. Yours truly, Pee-wee Gates." "Hey, Pee-wee," Monica called over. "You gonna marry her?" "If she wait," Pee-wee said. "I ain't getting married," Monica said. "I'm playing the field my whole life." "That's 'cause you so ugly there ain't no pressure on you," Pee-wee said. "As handsome as I am, I got all kinds of pressure on me to get married." I finished Pee-wee's letter and gave it to him. "You think she's going to wait for you?" I asked. "No, man, she's already married this fat fool." "Then why are you asking her to wait?" "Just to break her damn heart," Pee-wee said. I saw Pee-wee put a stamp on the letter and take it out to the mail sack. When he came back, he was quiet. It wasn't like Pee-wee to be quiet. I left him alone. Johnson came in, and Brunner opened his mouth to him. Something about being called a name not being a big thing. "You call me a cootie, I'm going to kick your ass too," Johnson said. "You said what?" Brunner was about 6'3" and as bulky as a football player. "I said I was gonna kick your ass if you call me out my name." Johnson got up and walked over to Brunner. Brunner looked at Johnson, shook his head, and picked up a magazine. He didn't want any part of Johnson. I couldn't stand the smell of the insect repellent, and it woke me up in the middle of the night when I put my arms near my head because that's where I put most of it. I looked around and saw Brew kneeling by the side of his bed praying. It was a good idea. I felt a little guilty about waiting until I got to Nam to think about God. On the other hand, I didn't want to not be close to God. I checked Brew out again, and he was praying away. I started out with the Lord's Prayer as best as I could remember it, got messed up with the part about trespassing, and gave it up. When I was small, Mama used to say a prayer with me before I went to sleep. It was before Kenny was born, and things had been pretty good for us. When I got bigger, she used to say it with Kenny. The night Daddy left, she came in and sat on Kenny's bed and started saying it. And Kenny saw her crying, and he started crying too. When she got to the part about dying before you wait, I put my head under the cover. I didn't say it in Nam either. The sound of incoming choppers woke us up in the morning. A moment later, we were being yelled at, whistles were blowing, and the morning cursing had started. The air outside was still and muggy, but I could smell cordite in the air. Lieutenant Carroll was near a tree, and I went over to him and asked him what was going on. "Beats the hell out of me," he said. He had coffee in his canteen cup, a cigarette between his fingers, and was leaning against a tree to take a leak. He peed all over his pants. "The next time I join a war, I'm going to get circumcised first," he said. "How you doing?" "Good," I said. "How'd the patrol go yesterday?" "Bad. Nothing happened, but I don't think we should have been out there." "Stewart?" He shrugged and walked away. We got powdered eggs and cold potatoes for breakfast. Then Lieutenant Berger from Delta Company came over. I thought he had something important to say, but he had the mail, which was pretty important. Nobody in our squad got mail but Johnson. He got a bill from the telephone company. After breakfast, things settled down to a boring normal. Lobel said that he weighed 173, and Wallowik said that he should lose weight. "You should take some of that candy they have," Wallowik said. Lobel and Wallowik went through some magazines until they found an ad for the candy that was supposed to make Lobel lose inches from his waistline. "Perry," Lieutenant Carroll called me to the front of the hooch. "Bring your gear." I got my gear and went outside. He told me that he had to supply one man for a patrol with Charlie Company, and since I had missed one patrol with the squad, it had to be me. He said he was sorry, and that I shouldn't be a hero. "Don't sweat it," I said. Chapter 8. "What's your name, soldier?" "Perry, sir." "Look, Perry, we're going out on a sector patrol. What we want to do is to establish a presence. We're not looking to get into a firefight. We see anything, we call in artillery. You have any questions, you ask me, okay?" "Yes, sir." "If we do get into anything, make sure you report any body count. One last thing. You stay close to Scotty over there. Scotty's our machine gunner. You can feed for him." Lieutenant Doyle was short, nervous. He cupped a cigarette in his hand the way I thought Humphrey Bogart would have. Charlie Company was going out in 2 sectors. The 1st platoon went out first. The 3rd and the 4th platoon, the one I was assigned to, were going next, and the 2nd platoon was going to be the backup in case anybody got into trouble. Scotty was about 6'5", with a face that was mostly ashy white, but the eyes were what set him apart. They were dark and darting. I had seen the look on ball players before. They were the kind of eyes that wanted to win. I was nervous being with these new guys. Scotty must have sensed it because he came over and told me everything was going to be cool. "Where are you from?" "New York," I said. "Harlem." "You a long way from home, man." "Where are you from?" "Tacoma, Washington," he said. "Doyle tell you about the stand down?" "No." "Charlie Company is going to be the first company that stands down," Scotty said. "We'll be standing down for 2 weeks, maybe even get down to Saigon." "The whole battalion standing down?" "From what I hear," Scotty said, "and this boy needs a little vacation. Far as I'm concerned, we can stand down till this thing is over." "I heard it could be over before Christmas." "Can't be too soon for this boy," Scotty said. Some guys were getting ready to move out, and Scotty got up and shouldered the .60 caliber machine gun. I crisscrossed 2 bandoliers of ammunition over my chest and grabbed a box full. It was heavy as hell. We went to the pads and then sat down waiting for the choppers. I liked the idea of standing down. A few weeks away from the combat zone would do me good. If we got to Saigon, maybe we could see what the cities were like before the war was over. 2 black guys came over and asked me if I was new. I said no, that I was on loan from Alpha Company. Then they asked me if I knew a guy named Gifford in Alpha. I didn't. Scotty introduced me to a couple of other guys, but I forgot their names as soon as I heard them. Lieutenant Doyle was yelling into the radio that the choppers were late. He was asking if the guy on the other end of the phone wanted us to go to the backup position. The best I could figure out, the answer was no. "You play ball?" Scotty asked. "Basketball," I said. "Play some baseball, but nothing to brag about." "I played football in high school, but couldn't get into a college. You know the only thing I'm good at?" "What?" "M60 machine gun. You know anybody out in the world need a good machine gunner?" I smiled. My mind shot ahead. What would I do when I got out? I had read some stuff in Stars and Stripes about Congress expanding the GI Bill. The paper said it didn't look too hopeful. The chopper finally came, almost an hour after they were supposed to. We got in and took off. The LZ was supposed to be secure, but I could see a few muzzle blasts coming from the thick green carpet below me as we came down. I flinched every time I saw one. Scotty and another guy, his name tag read Palumbus, kidded me about the flinching. "If you see the muzzle blast, it means that the bullet missed." He had a lot to learn about physics, but we were already landing. The struts were supposed to take the jolt out of the landing, but I wanted to be out before they hit. Scotty went just as I was thinking of going, and in a moment I was out and running behind him. The ammo box banged against my legs. I felt as if I were carrying a ton of equipment. We moved out quickly from the LZ and went into some tall grass. The grass cut my hands up so fast I thought I had walked into a booby trap. I couldn't believe it. It was like 1,000 paper cuts all over me. We had to cross a road, and Doyle was telling everybody to look out for mines. "I don't know why he tells us that," Scotty said. "They don't put the damn mines so you can see them, and we ain't got no detectors." A picture of Jenkins flashed through my mind. I didn't even look down. I just watched Scotty's back as we crossed the road. We found the area we were supposed to be in and dug in. Scotty had empty sandbags in his rucksack, and we filled them with dirt and made ourselves a little nest. Doyle was 20 meters away. The radio guy was with him, and by the time Scotty and I had finished our nest, Doyle and the radio guy were playing cards. "We just going to stay here?" I asked. "Doyle don't go too far," Scotty said. "He don't think this is his war anyway. He's got a Masonico service station back in New Jersey." "He got drafted?" "He got drafted 4 years ago, but he changed his name and stayed low," Scotty said. "Then the FBI caught up with him and brought him in. He got big connections and got into officers' candidate school." 2 jets streaked across the sky. Beautiful. Dark birds in a sweeping arc across a silver sky. "You join up?" Scotty asked. "Yeah, nothing to do in the world." "Me either." "That's why they give these dances," Scotty said. We sat for a half hour. Then Doyle told us we would be moving out in 15 minutes. Scotty and I had just started to unload the sandbags when the shooting started. "450, 450!" The shout went down the line. Someone had spotted where the firing was coming from and estimated it to be 450 meters in front of us. Scotty was leveling the legs of the tripod, and I jerked open the metal ammo case. "Get that thing going!" Doyle was yelling at us. I looked up and saw that he was on the radio. The radio man was firing at a line of small trees. I wasn't scared. For the first time, I wasn't scared. I didn't see anybody, no muzzle flashes. I was going to be okay. Scotty started firing the .60. There were tracers in the belt, and I could see the rounds spit across the distance. Leaves and small branches in front of us seemed to jump into the air. I kept feeding, but I didn't see anything. Doyle let the firing continue for a long time before calling out for us to cease fire. I watched him. He peered above the dirt mound he was behind. "You want to squad out?" Scotty called to Doyle. "I'm calling for Willie Peter," Doyle called back. "That's Doyle for you, man," Scotty said. "Whoever started the shooting probably didn't even see anything, but he's still going to call for a couple of rounds of Willie Peter just in case." We waited for another minute before a lone round of white phosphorus landed in the distant trees. "We're too close to be calling in artillery," Scotty said. One of our machine guns started chattering on our right, and Scotty opened up again. A moment later, some more white phosphorus started coming in. The Willie Peter sent streamers of fire into the air. The smell of it was terrible. Terrible and scary. Just the idea of being hit by a white phosphorus barrage sent a chill through me. The barrage lasted for 15 seconds, then stopped abruptly. Scotty nudged me and pointed toward Doyle. Doyle had his helmet off and was screaming into the radio. He was gesturing wildly, and then he stood up and looked toward the target area. The radio man stood and looked, too. The machine gun on the right opened up again, and Doyle started screaming, "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Doyle was jumping around and waving both of his arms over his head. "Oh, shit." Scotty turned around and leaned against the sandbags. "What's up?" I asked. "I hope not what I think it is," Scotty said. We waited as Doyle walked a little ahead of his position, hands on his hips, and looked out to the field ahead of us. Behind us, I heard choppers. I turned and saw them headed for us. They went by us out to the target zone. "Hey, Scotty. Did we..." "Yup. We just shot the shit out of the first platoon." We walked slowly across the field. There was some kind of crops being grown in between the trees. Half of it now burned out or uprooted by the shelling. As we got near the first platoon, the smell from the phosphorus grew stronger. They were loading the guys onto the medevac choppers. Medics were running from guy to guy. "Look in the bushes," a captain was shouting. We looked for wounded. They were all over the place. The medics were so busy they were just tagging guys. The ones they thought they could save, they worked on. The others, they marked their wounds down. One kid, the angry stain of blood on his t-shirt growing with every breath, watched calmly as the medic wrote up the tag. The medic tied it to his lapel and patted the kid's shoulder. When the medic left, the kid tried to read the tag without taking it off. If there were time, if the medic had finished with the ones he was fairly sure he could save, he would come back to the kid to see what he could do. I kept looking for other wounded. These were our people. The first chopper was moving out already. They were so quick. One guy had a plasma bottle strapped to his helmet. He was going through his pockets looking for matches to light his cigarette. He found them, but they were soaked through with his own blood. Scotty lit his cigarette. A sergeant was crying. He was sitting by himself, his rifle cradled in his arms, crying softly. Nobody was talking. There was nothing to say. More medevacs came in and took away the rest of First Platoon. The last one took the body bags. There had to be at least 15. We went back to the LZ an hour later. They had brought in the standby platoon to replace us. A Spec 4 from the first platoon had wandered away from the company and was riding with us. He was a young kid, really good looking. He had burns on his arms and face. Both eyebrows were gone, but he was still good looking. He looked so young. "Where are you from?" I asked. "Charlie Company, sir," he said. I started to tell him that I wasn't an officer, but it didn't matter. As soon as we landed, I was told to go back to my company. Scotty said that it was nice meeting me. "You okay?" Lieutenant Carroll was the first to meet me. "Yeah, sure. You know, the way they run this shit over the radio." Lieutenant Carroll shook his head. "You would think all hell was breaking loose." When I got to the hut, Pee-wee asked me what had happened. "We heard that you guys ran into a VC battalion or something," he said, "'cause I told them that Perry could handle the shit if it was only one damn battalion." "I was with their 4th platoon," I said. "We ran into their 1st platoon, and we hit them. They must have lost over a dozen guys." "You hit our own guys?" Monaco came over to where I was sitting on the bed. "I didn't hit them. The platoon leader called in artillery on their position." "Who spotted them?" Monaco asked. "I don't know." "Nobody knows nothing. That's why a bunch of guys get nailed for no reason." "Yo, man, I didn't mess them up." Monaco looked at me and walked away. I watched him lie down on his bunk with his face to the wall. "They messed up bad?" Pee-wee asked. "Yeah, real bad." Thanksgiving. This year, Kenny's birthday was on Thanksgiving, and I damn near forgot it. I figured it would take 3 weeks for anything to reach home from Nam. I didn't want to send him money. He could have used the money, but I wanted to send him something more. I asked Lieutenant Carroll if he thought I could get a knife in the mail. I told him it was for Kenny. Lieutenant Carroll said he had something else, and he gave me a jacket he had bought in Saigon. It was black silk, and there was a map in green of Nam on the back. I wanted to pay him for it, but he said no. I got the jacket in the last mail. Lieutenant Carroll was in the officer's hooch, and I stopped in to see him. He was sitting in his shorts. He was drinking from a bottle of Jack Daniels. "You know where I got this?" "Where?" "We went into a village about 6 months ago. I guess we surprised some VC. They left their meal, their cards, and this bottle behind. You want a drink?" I took a drink. It burned like hell going down. It came up easier. I couldn't sleep. They all started crowding in on me. The guy with the plasma taped to his helmet. The sergeant crying. None of them were together in my mind. They just kept coming, one by one. Short movies. A few seconds of a medic putting a tag on a wounded soldier. A few seconds of a chopper taking off over the trees. A guy cradling his rifle. A body bag. The guys that our artillery blew away didn't have a reason to die. They hadn't died facing the enemy. They just died because somebody else was scared, maybe careless. They died because they were in Nam, where being scared made you do things you would regret later. We were killing our brothers ourselves. Brew was getting ready to go to bed, and I went over to his bunk and asked him if he knew where the Lord's Prayer was in the Bible. "The Bible I got has an index," he said. "You can look up anything you want in the back." "Hey, that's cool." "You can borrow mine anytime you want," he said, tossing it to me. "You pray a lot when you're in the world?" I asked him. "Yeah, I prayed a lot," Bruce said. "But man, I didn't pray nowhere near as hard." Chapter 9. Brunner came into the hooch and told us to saddle up, that we were going on a pacification mission. Monaco asked him who had given the order. "Just get your ass in gear," Brunner snarled. "Who the hell elected you God?" Monaco hadn't moved, and neither had the rest of us. "How many stripes you got on your arm, Private Monaco?" Brunner walked to the end of Monaco's bunk. "Enough to know that I don't have to take any bull from you," Monaco said. Brunner kicked the end of Monaco's bunk hard enough to knock some magazines onto the wooden pallets that served as a floor. Monaco reached under his bunk, grabbed a grenade, and pulled the pin. "Now what do you think you're going to do with that, pretty boy?" Brunner said, looking down at Monaco. Monaco smiled, lifted the armed grenade high over his head, and flipped it toward Brunner. Everybody dove to the floor, screaming. I tried to pull my bunk down over me. I heard myself screaming as if the noise I made would somehow cut off the impact of the grenade. Pee-wee was on the floor near me. He had one hand over his head and his helmet over his rear end. I didn't stop screaming until I saw Wallowik, who had rolled himself into a tight little knot, get up. Slowly, we all got up. Wallowik started the cursing, and we joined in. Monaco was on his bunk laughing. "The next time, I'm gonna toss you one with the powder in it," he said to Brunner. "You're a fucking kid. You're a fucking kid." Brunner was screaming at the top of his lungs. "You call yourself a fucking soldier, but you're a fucking kid." We continued cursing out Monaco. He was called every lowlife and every animal we could think of, and then some. Pee-wee called him a faggot baboon dog, which was different. When we finished the cursing, we all laughed, all except Brunner and Brew. Brunner was still pissed, and Brew was praying. Brew's praying bothered me. It wasn't that I minded him being religious. It was just that I didn't want him being closer to God than I was. Everybody was interested in the pacification thing we were going on. It was like the closest thing to a real answer about why we were in Nam. Sergeant Simpson said that the Marines had done the bulk of it in the past, but that they were digging in up north to establish positions for the Tet truce. "Keep your eyes open and don't mess with the women folks," Sergeant Simpson said. "Keep your weapons on safe. I don't want none of y'all shooting me." I thought about my going out with Charlie Company and how we had shot at our own men. Then it left my mind. I noticed that lately there were things I would let myself think about and things I wouldn't. But every once in a while, things would come into my mind, not like a thought, but like a picture, and I felt a little strange about that. I wondered if that happened to any of the other guys. We mounted the choppers and started out. My stomach tensed when I saw the choppers. They were like a trigger. Even when I heard them putt-putting into the area, I would tense up. It meant that we were leaving the camp, leaving home. At the camp, I felt safe. Outside of the camp, anything was possible. It didn't take us long to get to the hamlet. Lieutenant Carroll was showing Sergeant Simpson the map, and I looked at it. It showed all the hills and the streams mostly. That was how we got around, following the hills and streams and paddies. Sometimes there would be a plantation that we would use as a reference, or a field of rice paddies. The hamlet consisted of a cluster of little huts. They were put together well. Some kids came out to greet us. Most of them were young, 4 or 5, 7 at the most. The M16 I carried felt bigger than it usually did. We came into the village to pacify the people who lived there. Lobo found me and came alongside. "You know who we are?" he asked. "Who?" "You remember those cowboy movies when the bad guys ride into town? You know, the killers?" "Yeah, that's us," Lobo said. "I'm not a killer," I said. He looked at me and smiled. I hated him saying that. I hated his smiling as if he had some dark secret. Sergeant Simpson was up ahead. He didn't walk, he loped. He was cool, simple. I trotted the few steps to catch up with him. "I wonder what they think of this war," I said, half to myself and half to Sergeant Simpson. I was looking at a group of Vietnamese kids playing in the mud. "It ain't so bad for them," he answered. "How can you say that? They're just kids." "'Cause they don't know nothing else," Simpson said. "You look around at these kids and their mamas, and you know they've been fighting and getting their asses kicked since way back before I was born. You ain't gonna find 10 of these people in all of First Corps know anything about no damn peace." I started telling him how he was wrong, but he cut me off. He told me not to fall asleep just because I was on a mission of peace. We had to go into each hut with little gifts. That was to make sure that there weren't any VC hiding out among the civilians. The people were the same. Small, withered women, skin creased over onto itself, dark, life-weary eyes that had seen everything. I felt huge walking among them. I towered over them. I was huge, and I was armed to the teeth, and these were not my people. Maybe they did look at me as if I were the killer in Lobel's movie. Then, on the other hand, the hell with Lobel. I wasn't a killer. The Vietnamese didn't look up at me. They looked down or at my chest. Sometimes, when they did look directly at us, they would shade their eyes with their hands as if they were looking at something very far away. I smiled at an old man and he nodded his head. I wondered what that meant. I had been trying to be friendly, and he just nodded. Did he know that I wanted him to like me? Wallowik found a place that had jars filled with some kind of paste. He thought they might have been Molotov cocktails and called Lieutenant Carroll over. Carroll smelled the jars and shrugged it off. "It's some kind of salve," he said. "Maybe it's good for jock itch or something." We were supposed to smile a lot and treat the people with dignity. They were supposed to think we were the good guys. That bothered me a little. I didn't like having to convince anybody that I was a good guy. That was where we were supposed to start from. We, the Americans, were the good guys. Otherwise, it didn't make the kind of sense I wanted it to make. I saw Brunner pocket a small statue from one of the huts. I told him about it, and he gave me the finger. "Maybe you'll be a better dude when you come back in your next life," I said. "Who knows? Cockroaches might be in by then." He took a step toward me, and Johnson, I hadn't seen him nearby, stepped next to me. Brunner looked at Johnson, then turned on his heel and walked away. "She ain't spit," Johnson said. Johnson went off and started looking at a pig that was tied in the back of one of the huts. Johnson was different than I thought he was at first. He didn't seem that sharp, but he knew things. He knew when somebody was doing something that he didn't like. He knew when one of the black guys was being messed with. And when he knew something, he put his butt on the line. That was Johnson. Maybe back in Savannah he was different, but the war made him a certain somebody. The same way that it made Monaco a certain somebody. Monaco was the point man. Johnson had the pig, the big 60, the heavy machine. Who the hell was I? I found Pee-wee trying to play a game with some Vietnamese kids. "These little fuckers trying to cheat me," Pee-wee said. The kids were laughing, having a good time. I told Pee-wee about the salve that Wallowik had found, and he wanted to go get some. "Why, you got jock itch?" "They got medicine for the stuff they be catching over here," Pee-wee said. "Right?" "Right." "And we over here, right?" "Right." We slept in hooches that were surrounded by sandbags. There were vents on both ends, and sometimes they worked. Usually, though, the hooches were hot as anything. We had put straw and leaves on the roof of our hooch back at the base to keep the sun from baking us, but it didn't help that much. The huts that the Vietnamese lived in were made on bamboo frames and covered with woven bamboo slats and dried flat leaves. The joints weren't nailed. They were notched and tied with either rope or wire. Some of the huts had slats that could be adjusted to let the light in. They were cool enough inside, especially the ones with the high ceilings. Pee-wee and I found the hut with the salves and went inside. There were 2 women and a kid sitting on the floor. One of the women was old, the other not much more than a girl. The kid was 2 at most and didn't have any pants on. The whole place stunk of urine and God knows what. "What medicine good for?" Pee-wee asked in his best, "Let's go talk to the Indians" dialogue. The 2 women just looked at us. "What medicine good for?" Pee-wee asked again. "My America #1, the girl said. "Viet Cong #10. "Yeah, I know we #1, Pee-wee said, "but what the damn medicine good for?" I took a bottle of salve, put some on my finger. The smell of it was awful, and put it near my mouth. I raised my eyebrows. "No, no." The old woman took the salve from me, took some of it on 2 bony fingers and started rubbing it in my hair. She said something to the younger woman, and she reached up and felt my hair. I remembered in the orientation lecture that you weren't supposed to touch the head of a Vietnamese person. "If they rubbing our heads for luck, I'm gonna burn this mother down," Pee-wee laughed. He was comfortable with the Vietnamese. We tried to work out what all the salves were for. The first salve was something that was supposed to make hair grow. We couldn't figure out most of the others, but we did figure that one was to rub on a girl's stomach to either get her pregnant or after she got pregnant. We couldn't figure out which. And the last was to put on your feet. Pee-wee paid them 300 piastres, about $3, for 4 bottles of the hair stuff and the feet stuff. He said that he was going to take the stuff home and make a fortune growing hair. I told him not to mix them up. We didn't want people growing hair between their toes. A chopper brought in some hot food for us and some grain and a box of chicks for the people in the hamlet. Brunner told Carol that he thought that one of the older girls in the hamlet was a VC. Carol told him not to worry about it. "We're not playing I Declare War today," Lieutenant Carroll said. "That comes next week. This week, you have a choice of stickball, ring alivio, and pacification." There was another outfit doing a pacification project a few kilometers from us, and the chopper that had picked them up was waiting with our chopper. We loaded up and both choppers cut their engines. Then, bingo, they both started up, and we raced back to the base. Our chopper lost by a few seconds. When we got back, there was a lot of yelling in the camp. We were having roast beef, mashed potatoes, carrots, and carrot cake again for supper, and everybody was pissed. An officer wanted to start an investigation, and somebody else wanted to frag the cooks. It wasn't the greatest supper in the world, and the cooks served it in flak jackets. Lieutenant Carroll said that we were going on another pacification mission the next day. Then an hour later, he came and told us that we weren't. "How come?" Brew was trying to increase his vocabulary and was working on a quiz in Reader's Digest. "That's just the way it is," Carroll said. Later, Monaco heard from Sergeant Simpson that Captain Stewart got us out of it. "You can't get a body count on a pacification run," Monaco said. Pee-wee got a letter from Erlene that said she still loved him even though she married somebody else. She said she was pregnant, and if the baby was a boy, she was going to name it Harry, after him. Also, Lobo got a letter from his father. The letter was really full of crap. He read it out loud. The whole thing was about how could he go into war and kill innocent people. "Young men all over the country are burning their draft cards and resisting the war machine," Lobo read. "He probably got war machine from one of his 15-year-old girlfriends. Lobo didn't make a big thing over it, but I didn't think it was really that cool with him. I sat with him at chow and listened for a while as he talked about movies. Then I asked him about the letter. "You know why this letter sucks?" he asked. "How come?" "Because I joined the friggin' army in the first place so he would stop thinking I was a faggot," Lobo said. "Now he thinks I'm a creep because I'm in the army." What the hell does he know? "You know what I hope?" Lobo asked. "I hope I get killed over here so he has to fit that shit between his vodka martinis. The next time we call for artillery, we'll aim right at your pad at home," I said. "You know what that jackass doesn't know?" Lobo said, looking away from me. "He don't know that now I can go back home and blow him away. That's what I'm fucking trained for, man. That's what I'm fucking trained for." Mail call. Got a letter from Kenny. He said a guy is starting a basketball league for kids from 9 to 11. He said he didn't think he was that good in basketball, but he wanted to enter. Everybody on the winning team will get a trophy. He needed $10 though, and Mama didn't have the money. I answered him right away. I told him that he would do just fine in basketball. I put $20 in the letter for him. It was good having Kenny need me. I almost cried as I thought about him. It had been tough on me not being able to go to college, but things had been tough on him too. In a neighborhood where you had to be tough just to get to the store with money for a loaf of bread, Kenny wasn't tough at all. I had been sort of a father to him since our folks split, and I know he missed me. I thought about what Lobo had said. Here he was with a gun, ready to kill people to prove that he wasn't queer, and I was ready to kill people because I wanted to get away from home. I told myself I would write to Kenny more, and to Mama too. "Hey, Perry, what you thinking about?" "My brother," I said to Pee-wee. "Why don't you think about girls so we can get some more sex in the atmosphere?" "Right on." 2 American Red Cross workers came around and passed out candy and stuff. They were the first American women we had seen in a long while, and the guys just kept looking at them. A funny thing happened. One of them, her name was Sam, asked me what I was going to do when I got home. The question embarrassed me. I was so embarrassed I think she felt bad. She made a few jokes and I laughed harder than I should have, and she went off to the next guy. I remembered sitting in the counselor's office my second week in high school. The counselor, a short, red-haired woman with blue eyes that bulged slightly from a thin face, had asked me what I had wanted to do in life. "I'd like to be a philosopher," I said. She had started laughing and apologizing at the same time. It was simply not the kind of thing, she explained, that she had expected. I was hurt. I didn't even know what a philosopher did for sure, but her laughing messed me up. After that, I never told anyone I wanted to be a philosopher again, or even a writer. I started telling people in school that I wanted to work on a newspaper. Around the block, I told people that I either wanted to play ball or teach. But I was always uncomfortable with the question. Even when Kenny had asked me, I couldn't come up with anything easily. "Something important?" he had offered. Yeah. It was a good answer, and we both had a feel for what it meant. Bad news. A patrol from Echo Company went out on a pacification thing to the same hamlet we went to, and 2 guys got hit. They were on their way into the place when it happened. They searched the whole place but didn't find any VC. Everybody felt bad about that. Then we were told we had to go to the hamlet again. "What the VC do is to go in when we leave and mess up anybody that got help from us. If they see they got some grain from us or some pills that they didn't turn over to them, then they kill the head of the village," Sergeant Simpson said. "What we gotta do," Sergeant Simpson went on, "is to lay an ambush outside the hamlet. If they come in, they gotta fight their way out." "How about the people in the hamlet?" Brew asked. "We gotta show them that we can be peaceful if they peaceful with us. Or we can mess them up," Sergeant Simpson said. "Pacify them to death," Pee-wee said. "Something like that," Sergeant Simpson said. Chapter 10. It was a platoon thing, but not really a full platoon thing. Our squad was cool, but the other squads were all cut down to 4 or 5 men. It was a platoon on paper, but it was just paper, not men. We mounted the choppers an hour before nightfall. We were at the LZ in a little over 10 minutes. Sergeant Simpson laid out a new route to the hamlet. We cut through some dense underbrush for a half hour before we got near the hamlet. Sergeant Simpson laid out the ambush. It was simple enough. We were on one side of a small cemetery. The reports had it that the VC came past the cemetery into the hamlet at night. They terrorized the people in the hamlet, taking what they called attacks and killing anybody they thought might have been informing on them. We were supposed to surprise them, to make them pay for coming to the hamlet. Monaco, as usual, was point. He was about 40 meters beyond the cemetery. The way we figured, they had to pass him to get to the cemetery. We had claymore mines at the end of the cemetery, and then the rest of the platoon stretched out in a straight line along what we had been told was the path the VC took. Johnson and Brew would be at the end of the line we formed. We moved in quietly, with Sergeant Simpson placing each of us and making sure that we knew where the others were. "Try not to kill each other if you can help it," he said. We dug in. I had 5 sandbags, which I filled and put in front of me. Suddenly, they weren't big enough or solid enough. I wanted something else. A wall, maybe? I could rest my piece on the sandbags, but it didn't look very convincing. Silence. There wasn't to be any communication between us in case the VC had lookouts. Suppose, I thought, they had spotted us already. The only radio we had, a PRC-10, or Prick 10 as they called it, was near Lieutenant Carroll. Brew had it. I didn't want the radio. The antenna made you stick out like a sore thumb and drew a lot of fire. It got dark. There were bugs. Somewhere in the distance, I heard frogs. The night was filled with noises. After a while, it dawned on me that I couldn't see anything. There was a moon above us, but it didn't give us enough light. I wanted each VC to have his own light shining right on him. It was 22:30 hours. Back home in Harlem, it would have been 10:30. The 8 o'clock parties would be just hotting up. Kenny would be fighting with Mama about going to bed. Maybe he would wonder about what I was doing. If he was in bed already, he would be reading comics under the blanket with a flashlight. I wondered if he would feel anything if I got nailed. Would he wake up in the middle of the night wondering what was wrong? Would he feel uneasy, knowing that halfway around the world his brother was hurting? Kenny, I love you. We waited. I told myself that I was bored. I wondered if Mama was getting the allotment checks. I wondered how she felt about them. Did she think I was doing something for her, or just that it was part of my being in the Army? I didn't know myself. At 2300 hours, I had to pee. Actually, I had to do more than that, but no way I was taking my pants down out in the boonies. I felt around me to see if I was on an incline, decided I wasn't, and lay on the one side and peed as quietly as I could. It was grave dark and quiet except for the things that crawled in the night. Suppose everyone else was gone. Suppose I was out here by myself. Forget that. Think about something else. Think about Diana Ross waking me up in the morning, begging me not to get out of bed. No, wait. Her and Juliet Prowse were secretly sisters trying to get me to make love to them. The thing was, I was a virgin. I didn't tell anybody because I wasn't supposed to be a virgin. I was supposed to be hip. Everybody knew how blacks were, how soldiers were. Everybody knew, and I was still lying in behind a few inches of sand halfway around the world from anything I knew without having loved anything deeply or spent time with anyone in a bed alone. Maybe it wasn't important. Insects chirped, moved through the night. There were shadows all around me, laughing, jerking, mocking. A sound. I raised my head slightly to hear better. Voices. Vietnamese voices. I brought my hand to the weapon. My finger played with the safety. Shadows ahead of me. They were coming out of the cemetery. They moved about, talking quietly, calm, sing-song rhythms. What were they talking about? The lousy child they got in the army? Their families? Someone opened up. A scream. We were all firing. It was too dark to aim. I just fired in what I thought was the right direction. They began to answer fire. I could see faces over the light from the muzzle blasts. I fired faster, trying to space my rounds in a sector. I heard a bullet whine past me and flinched even though I knew it was already gone. A grenade went off, and then another. I kept firing. I didn't know where my rounds were going. "Cease fire!" Simpson's voice. "Take cover!" Lieutenant Carroll. A small pop, and a flare went high into the air. A moment later, the entire area was lit up. There was nothing in front of us. I looked from side to side. Then I saw a body, and another. Thin arms, not much different in color than mine. A hand waving slowly in the night air, trying to push away the death already there. One body lay face down. There was a tremendous wound on the back. It's what a blast from an M16 can do. We kept shooting at the bodies even though they were already dead. "Get another flare up!" Sergeant Simpson's voice cracked as he spoke. Brunner sent another flare into the sky as the rest of us searched the area with our eyes, not moving from the spot we were in. "What the fuck happened?" Monaco came through the trees. "They passed by you?" "No." "Here!" Pee-wee called us over and we went. He had found one of them lying a few feet from the entrance to a tunnel. The tunnel was near the corner of the cemetery, covered by a low, sprawling bush. Sergeant Simpson took a grenade, pulled the pin, and threw it into the opening as hard as he could. We stepped back, and a moment later the grenade went off. "Okay, let's hit it," he said. We were starting off, backing out of the village toward the pickup zone. I felt sick. My stomach churned. I looked for Pee-wee and found him. There was nothing to read in his face. A pop. Nothing more. A small pop, almost lost in the sounds of the jungle around us. We hit the dirt, the mud. We returned fire. Someone sent up a flare that was defective. It burned for a second and then went out quickly. To my left, I heard someone crying out. Not loudly. There was no panic, but a gentle cry of surprise. I turned just as the last of the light from the flare was dying. It was Lieutenant Carroll. The squad lit up the woods with fire as Sergeant Simpson barked into the radio. We started making our way toward the village. Johnson and Wallowick carried Lieutenant Carroll. Carried him. He was limp. His legs dragged behind him. God have mercy. God have mercy. I looked toward his face, but he was a silhouette, lost in the darkness of the moment. Pain. I thought my heart was stopping. I couldn't breathe. We went to the edge of the village and somebody shot off another flare. "Keep their heads down!" Sergeant Simpson pointed toward the village. Pee-wee sent a burst of fire into the village. Johnson had put Lieutenant Carroll down and was setting up the M60. The 60, the pig, was hungry, angry that they had hit our man, our leader. "Cover the trail," Sergeant Simpson called to Johnson. Pee-wee and Monaco kept pumping rounds high into the village while Johnson sprayed the trail behind us. We didn't see anything. The fire could have come from the village. Lieutenant Carroll, lying behind a wide tree, was a dark silhouette. No one in the squad spoke. We were afraid for Lieutenant Carroll. We were afraid for ourselves. And our only answer to the fear that called each of our names was to fire blindly into the fearful darkness. It took the chopper another 5 minutes to get to us. But we hadn't done to the village. It did. It leveled the huts. There were Vietnamese, mostly women and old men, running for their lives. Few of them made it more than a few feet as the chopper guns swept everything in their path. These were the people we had come to save, to pacify. Now it was ourselves that we were saving. God have mercy. God give us peace. The chopper came down and we handed up Lieutenant Carroll, a burnt offering. We didn't hand him up gently through the chopper doors. We pushed him as hard as we could. It was his life, but it was our lives as well. God have mercy. We all climbed on and the chopper tilted, jerked, and was off. The door gunner kept spraying the village as we moved off into the night. A medic on the chopper looked for Lieutenant Carroll's wound but couldn't find it. Bars of lights passed through us. There were eyes, the outlines of helmets. There was Lieutenant Carroll, unconscious. "Anybody see where he was hit?" The medic was already putting in the IV. We hadn't seen. There weren't any signs of blood. "Maybe he just passed out," Monaco said. The medic didn't answer. He just shook his head. We didn't land at the base. We went on to Chu Lai. The whole squad made the trip. We got there in what seemed a short time. An ambulance was waiting for us. They took Lieutenant Carroll and the rest of us went off to one side and sat outside a building. I was trembling, and I couldn't stop. Pee-wee put his hand on mine and tried to calm it. I took deep breaths. A major came by, saw us sitting on the ground, and came over to us. "What are you men doing here?" he asked. "I don't know, sir," I heard Monaco say. "What unit you with?" Nobody answered. He looked at us and then said something about either him being in charge or maybe he asked who was in charge. I didn't know. Sergeant Simpson got to his feet and talked to him, and then we were all headed over to a low building. It was a mess hall, and two cooks sitting listening to the radio got coffee for us. One of the medics who had been on the chopper came over, and we asked him how Lieutenant Carroll was doing. He said he didn't know, only that he was over in Building A3. We finished the coffee and went over to see him. "He got hit under the arm," a hawk-faced doctor was saying. "That's why the medics couldn't find the wound. Almost in the armpit. It wouldn't have done any good if they had found it, though." Monaco knew the prayer. "Lord, let us feel pity for Lieutenant Carroll and sorrow for ourselves and all the angel warriors that fall. Let us fear death, but let it not live within us. Protect us, O Lord, and be merciful unto us. Amen. Chapter 11. Shock. Pain. Nobody wanted to look at anybody else. Nobody wanted to talk. There was nothing to say. Lieutenant Carroll's death was close. It hung around our shoulders and filled the spaces between us. Lieutenant Carroll had sat with us, had been afraid with us, had worried about us. Now he was dead. It happened so quick, Brunner said. That's the way it goes, Monaco said. He shrugged and continued relacing his boots. I looked over at him. His eyes glistened with tears. I started checking my rifle. At the camp, Sergeant Simpson asked me to write a letter to Lieutenant Carroll's family. I said I couldn't do it, and he asked me why. I just can't, I said. If he was laying out in the boonies, and he was calling to you needing your help, what would you do? He's not laying out in the boonies, I said. Yeah, man, he is, Simpson said. He just in too deep to get out. I took Lieutenant Carroll's personal stuff from Sergeant Simpson and started looking through it. There were letters to his wife, Lois, back in Kansas. He wanted to open a bookstore if she could find a place. I read part of one of his letters to her. No, I don't think having the bookstore so close to the library is a bad idea. The place on Minnesota Avenue is close enough to the bridge so that we can get customers from Missouri as well. The idea of the bookstore is so comforting to me, Lois. I have this vision of me working behind the counter and you taking care of the baby in the back. Better yet, you work the counter and I'll take care of the baby. Have you considered Karen as a name if it's a girl? It's your mother's name, and I like it. There were local newspapers that she had sent him and an alumnus bulletin from Emporia State College. There were pictures of his wife, a pretty girl, blonde, dark-rimmed glasses, in a winter coat. There was snow on the street behind her. Another picture of the two of them together in bathing suits. She looked less pretty, but the two of them looked so happy together. It took me 3 tries to get the letter even close to something worth saying, and then it was nothing special. In a way, I felt real bad just being alive to write it. I could think of her wondering why I didn't do something, why I didn't save him. Dear Mrs. Carroll, my name is Richard Perry, and I had the good fortune to serve under your husband. Last night, we ran into heavy fighting in an area we've been trying to protect for some time. Lieutenant Carroll was in the process of getting us out of there safely despite the fact that we had run into more of the enemy than we expected to when he was wounded. The medevac choppers got him down to Chulai, to the medical unit there, and they tried their best to save him, but could not. Mrs. Carroll, I know that it is not much comfort to you that your husband died bravely or honorably, but he did. All of the guys in the squad who served under him are grateful for his leadership and for having known him. I am sorry to have to write to you under these circumstances. Yours, Richard Perry. I read the letter to Pee Wee and Wallowick, and they said it was okay. Then I gave it to Sergeant Simpson to take to HQ. I thought about Mama getting a letter about me. What would she do with it? Would she put it in the drawer she kept Daddy's papers in? Would she sit on her bed in the middle of the night and take it from the drawer to read like she did his stuff? I wondered how Kenny would feel. I had to get my mind off of Lieutenant Carroll. The guys in the squad hung out together after we got back to the camp. The conversation was quiet, almost reverent. We got 6 copies of a book called Valley of the Dolls, and Brew hit a rat with one of them. The rat was as big as any I've ever seen. Lieutenant Carroll stayed on my mind. I knew he would. I thought of his calling Jenkins a warrior angel. It was a gentle thing to say, and he had been a gentle man. We spent another day lying around. It seemed to be what the war was about. Hours of boredom, seconds of terror. Morning. The coffee was pretty good. Somebody had found a cache of coffee beans about 2 months earlier, and they had sent to Saigon for a coffee grinder. I wasn't hungry, so I just had coffee in the hooch. Lobel came over to my bunk. He was really shaken by Carol's death. He sat on the edge of my bunk, and I could see he was trying to say something. He finally got it out. "Hey, Perry, you know, I kind of feel that maybe it was my fault." "What?" "You know, about Carol." "It wasn't your fault, man. Throughout the whole thing, I was just lying there, scared out of my mind." There was distress on Lobel's face. "I think I'm a coward." "It wasn't anybody's fault," I said. "The Kongs got him. I keep thinking, if I had shot more, maybe a lucky shot would have got the guy that..." He stopped and shook his head. I thought he was going to cry. I was so scared I didn't see them until it was over. "The Kongs?" Pee Wee had heard Lobel and sat up. "Yeah." Lobel was wringing his hands. "You know, I didn't see one till it was over," Pee Wee said. "I remember what you said about Charlie Company fucking each other up, and I thought we done did the same shit until I see that Kong land near that tunnel. I was glad as hell to see him too." "You didn't see them during the fight?" Lobel looked up at Pee Wee. "The only time I seen a live, straight money Kong was that guy they was questioning. As far as I'm concerned, the Kongs could sneak their asses clear out the damn country and we'd be here fighting for 2 more years. "How about you, Perry?" Lobel looked at me. "Did you see them?" "During the fight?" "Yeah." "I don't know," I said. "Maybe I saw their faces over the muzzle fire. I just fired where I thought they were. I've never aimed at anything. I've never seen anything to shoot at." Lobel looked down at his hands again. Sergeant Simpson came in and said that Captain Stewart wanted me over at headquarters. I went over, and there were 2 colonels there. One was a Marine Corps guy. I started to salute, but the Marine Corps guy just walked away from me. Stewart motioned for me to sit down. They had a guy tied up in the middle of the room. I guess he was VC. A Vietnamese interpreter was talking to him. I couldn't understand any Vietnamese, but I listened all the same. An orderly had made coffee and passed it around. He brought me a cup and I thanked him with a nod. It was black and it didn't have any sugar, but I didn't want to get up and get the milk and sugar next to the Marine colonel. "What's he talking about, Vin?" the colonel asked. He says he's a fisherman. He says he works on Songabong River, but he doesn't have an accent like that. He has an accent from the north. Then he say that the VC make him fight with them, but he doesn't want to. He says that if he is killed, his people don't get his body from the VC. He doesn't want to be buried under a tree in the forest. That's what the VC do. Tell him I don't believe a word he's saying, the Marine colonel said. Tell him that if he doesn't tell me the truth pretty soon, I'm going to have to shoot him. The Vietnamese spoke to the prisoner again. This time, his words were harsher. He slapped him a few times, then took his gun out. The VC was rocking and talking as fast as he could. His voice rose as he spoke. The Vietnamese officer hit the prisoner with his pistol butt. Is he saying the same thing? The Army colonel asked. His name tag read Mulig. Now he say they make him fight with the 2nd Division, the interpreter said. He says he hates Army life. The 2nd? The Marine colonel looked at the VC as if he were seeing him for the first time. He actually said the 2nd? That's what he said, the interpreter reported. That's the 5th one we got from the 2nd in the last 2 days. Something's up. Get him over to Chulai to intelligence there. Let them work him over for a bit. The Marine colonel and the Army colonel both left. Captain Stewart talked to the major who stayed behind for a few minutes, and then the major left. The orderly went to Captain Stewart and spoke to him. I heard him mention my name. Stewart, who had been leaning on the edge of a desk, came over to me. Your name Parry? Yes, sir. You wrote the letter to Lieutenant Carroll's wife? Yes, sir. Damn good letter, boy. Captain Stewart wiped away some tobacco juice from his chin with his thumb. You know how to type? I can use somebody in here who can type and speak English. I can't type, sir. Well, it's still a damn good letter, he said. He turned and walked away. I finished the coffee as 2 guys blindfolded the VC to take him back to Chulai. He was trembling. They found some tortured Marines up near the demilitarized zone, the orderly said. He probably thinks they're going to do the same thing to him. Tortured? They tie them to trees and pull their guts out, the orderly said. Then they just leave them there. That Marine colonel said when they found them, they were still alive and begging for somebody to kill them. For the Marines to kill them? They begged for the Marines to kill them? Yeah, the orderly said. And now they think that a whole regiment of North Vietnamese regulars are coming through Laos and Cambodia now. Damn, to say the least, the orderly said. Back at the hooch, I told Pee-wee what the orderly had said. Pee-wee asked what had happened to the truce, and I told him I didn't know. We had a half-hearted volleyball game against some guys from HQ Company. They beat us easily and made a lot of noise about how good they were. Pee-wee wanted to take a shot at one of them. When I got back to the hooch after the game, I saw the Vietnamese house girl putting something on the end of my bunk. I went to see what it was and saw that it was Lieutenant Carroll's pictures. For some reason, I put them with my stuff. The war was different now. Nam was different. Jenkins had been outside of me. Even the guys in Charlie Company had been outside. Lieutenant Carroll was inside of me. He was part of me. Part of me was dead with him. I wanted to be sad, to cry for him, maybe bang my fist against the sides of the hooch. But what I felt was numb. I just had these pictures of him walking along with us on patrol, or sitting in the mess area, looking down into his coffee cup. It was what I was building in my mind, A series of pictures of things I had seen, of guys I had seen. I found myself trying to push them from my mind, but they seemed more and more a part of me.
This ends Disc 3.